On Fineprint today, we are going to tell you why Africa is setting their sights on China. And this is not for trade, it is for military training. Chinese military schools have long been a hub for African leaders, from current presidents of Eritrea and Zimbabwe, 10 defense chiefs, 8 defense ministers to army chiefs. The big names are testament that China has become a major destination for African professional military education. Before, China would attract thousands of African officers, but the pandemic drastically reduced that number. If we compare with other countries, China is outmatched by its Western peers across nearly every metric. The United States, United Kingdom, and France each have at least 50 military attachés in the continent. China has 21. Western countries have more than 50 bases and other facilities. The United States alone has 27 military outposts. In this sector, China only has 1. But it seems like the trend is going to change now. African militaries are appreciating the fact that China offers far more scholarships than Western countries. And it's not just military. There is more at play here. Look at what is happening in Niger and the Sahel region. The anti-West sentiment is growing. One of the reasons behind Niger's coup is that the president is seen as pro-France. So the anti-West narrative is building a thriving space for China. This is a win-win situation for Africa and China. Africa doesn't want a 21st century colonizer, and China only wants its interests served. It is a political and economic model that screams anti-West. Retired Colonel Rich Outzen, who is a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council and the Jamestown Foundation, is joining us now live from Washington, D.C. Colonel Rich, welcome to the show. Critics say professional military training is helping to strengthen relationships between China and African countries, in turn extending Beijing's influence. How do you look at that? Is it a way to go for Africa?
Well, it's good to be with you, Eric. I think, of course, the United States has done something very similar for decades now, where we, for professional military education, invite mid-level African officers as well as their colonels who are about to be generals, and bring them to the United States for courses, sometimes of a few months, sometimes for up to a year. They get to know the people, they build friendships and bonds. I think it's smart for China, frankly, from a geopolitical perspective, to do the same thing. What's more interesting to me is not that, because they're doing it, frankly, on a smaller scale, and they don't really have a lead in this area. But it's kind of the way they're doing it. They're not doing this as part of a major military presence in country and or on continent, I should say, in Africa. They don't have in mind, tens of thousands of Chinese soldiers coming in to be at bases that are approved by these officers they've worked with. Right. It's a much slower and smaller sort of an approach that's linked to their businesses. There's over 10,000 Chinese businesses in various African countries, and almost all of them have some security presence, either military police or civilian police. So they're building a very distributed and a very small scale, but still significant military presence, and the professional military education is certainly a piece of that.
South Africa did conduct naval drills recently with Russia and China. What does this mean for China?
Well, China views Africa as, first and foremost, an area for its businesses to make money. The Chinese model is sort of an exploitative model where they come and they run their own enterprises. They essentially establish Chinese towns with Chinese police to conduct ore extraction and things like that. That's the lead. The military presence is not there necessarily to conduct coups or to oppose coups or to promote democracy or against a single threat. Really, the Chinese presence there is to protect its investments. It's to make sure that if there is a coup or if there is a terror attack, that it does not approach Chinese business interests that are there. So I think what China is pursuing is this combination of economic investment and security relationships to protect that investment. That in a country or a continent, rather, that Europe and the United States haven't paid a lot of attention to, this gradualistic approach seems to be working. They're buying influence.
Colonel Rich, China has managed to permeate in the continent through trade. Should the continent be wary now when it comes to partnering with Beijing on matters defense and military?
Well, absolutely. Now, I should say that for leadership in African countries, it is a smart thing to do some comparison shopping, right? So if they're not getting the amount of military or security training or equipping that they want from Western powers, of course they should look at all possible venues. But they should also keep in mind that when you go with a Chinese model, even though they're silent for the most part on local politics, they are putting their technology and their surveillance into your country. So there are certain things, it's like the debt trap also, when there's certain African countries that owe over half of their annual GDP in debt to China. So China has its way of getting its hooks into these countries. And then all of a sudden they've penetrated your communication systems, your finance systems, and they have virtual control. So everything has a price. And in the case of Western military aid, that price is human rights standards and sort of democratization push. In the case of Chinese, it's them permeating some of the sensitive infrastructure and instruments of state.
All right, I've been talking to a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council and the Jamestown Foundation, Colonel Rich Artzen. Thank you very much for your insights and for talking to WION Wild is One today.
Good to be with you.